The air at the border was thin and sharp, tasting of pine and old stone in the coming frost. It was a taste Elara had learned to associate with fear. Her alpha, Marcus, stood a few feet away, his shoulders rigid beneath his worn leather tunic. He stared into the shadowed woods of the Blackmir territory, the enemy lands, with an expression she couldn't decipher. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't remorse. It was the grim, hollowed-out look of a man about to sacrifice a pawn to save his king. She was the pawn. The rest of her pack, the Silverwood pack, huddled 100 yards behind them, their forms indistinct in the gray twilight. They did not look at her, and in the last week, since the decree had been made, they had treated her as if she were already a ghost, a walking corpse. Her stomach, a tight and painful knot from 3 days of forced fasting, growled in protest. They had wanted her weak, compliant. They had succeeded. Her bones felt like brittle glass, her head light with hunger and despair. "He will be here soon," Marcus said, his voice a low rasp that the wind snatched away. He did not turn to face her. Elara wrapped her thin arms around herself, the threadbare wool of her dress doing little to ward off the visceral chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Why?" she whispered, the sound pathetic even to her own ears. She had asked 100 times. She had received 100 different silences. This time he answered, his gaze still fixed on the oppressive, silent trees. "Because a treaty must be sealed. Because the Alpha King of the Blackmir demands a tribute." "A tribute," she repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Not a wolf, not a warrior. Me." She was nothing, an omega with no family, no standing, whose only value, it seemed, was in being disposable. "You will do your duty to this pack," he snarled, a flicker of his usual cruelty surfacing. "You will stand there, you will be silent, and you will accept your fate. The survival of the many outweighs the life of one." The hypocrisy of it was a searing thing, a hot coal in her chest. His pack was starving. Their lands were failing, the soil turning sour and the game growing scarce. For years, Marcus had preached hatred for the Blackmir wolves, for their dark king who ruled the mountains with an iron fist. He called them savages, monsters who thrived in shadow. And now he was selling one of his own to them, crawling to their border to offer a tribute, to offer her. A tremor went through the ground, a low thrum that vibrated up through the soles of her worn boots and into her very marrow. It was not an earthquake. It was power. The trees across the border seemed to darken, the shadows deepening into an inky, impenetrable black. A presence was coming, a vast, predatory presence that made the air crackle and the hair on her arms stand on end. Marcus took an involuntary step back, his hand twitching toward the hilt of a knife he would never dare to draw. Even from here, Elara could smell the sudden, sharp spike of his fear. It was a scent she knew well, but she had never smelled it on him before. It gave her a sliver of grim satisfaction. From the heart of the woods, a figure emerged, and then another and another. They were huge, larger than any wolves in her pack, their pelts the color of midnight and storm clouds. But it was the man who walked at their head that stole the breath from her lungs. He was a creature of myth and nightmare. The Alpha King, Kael. He was impossibly tall, built on a scale that seemed more than human, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the dying light. He wore no crown, no finery, just simple black trousers and a tunic that strained across the formidable muscle of his chest. His dark hair was long, unbound, and stirred in the same wind that cut through Elara's dress. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with his sheer size, a predator in his natural element. His power rolled off him in palpable waves, a suffocating force that demanded submission. He stopped just across the ancient, crumbling stone line that marked the border. His escort of massive wolves fanned out behind him, their eyes glowing with a feral intelligence. But Kael only had eyes for Marcus. Alpha Marcus. The king's voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It held no warmth, only a profound and chilling authority. "You came, Your Majesty," Marcus choked out, bowing his head in a gesture of subservience that made Elara's stomach clench. "As agreed, a tribute to seal our peace." He gestured toward Elara without looking at her, a flick of his hand as if presenting a piece of livestock. The Alpha King's gaze slid from Marcus. For a heartbeat, it swept over her, dismissive, cold, and then it stopped. It snagged. It caught on her as if it had struck a physical barrier. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air grew thick, heavy, vibrating with a sudden, searing energy. A jolt, white-hot and electric, shot through Elara's body, a phantom touch that made her gasp. His eyes. They had been a cool, distant silver, but in that instant, they ignited. They flared into a breathtaking, terrifying molten gold, burning with an intensity that felt like it was peeling back her skin, layer by layer, seeing every fear, every scar, every secret corner of her soul. It was a gaze that was not just looking, but seeing something no one had ever seen before. His wolf. The thought screamed through her mind, a piece of old lore she'd heard whispered by the elders. His wolf knew. But what did it know? A low growl tore from the Alpha King's throat. A visceral, possessive sound that was not human. It was pure, primal wolf. The sound resonated deep in Elara's chest, a sympathetic vibration that made her own blood sing with a strange, terrifying hum. His entire posture had changed. He was no longer a king assessing a treaty. He was a predator that had just scented its prey, or something else entirely, something more profound. "What?" Kael breathed, the single word a command, a threat, and a question all at once. "Is this?" Marcus flinched. "The tribute, Your Majesty. The Omega, Elara, as we discussed." The king's burning gaze did not leave her. He took a single, deliberate step, crossing the stone border into Silverwood territory. A collective gasp went up from Marcus's pack. It was an act of war. But it did not feel like one. It felt like an act of destiny. He stalked toward her, his golden eyes glowing with an impossible light. The world narrowed to the space between them. The wind died. The birds fell silent. All Elara could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart and the soft thud of his boots on the damp earth. He was a force of nature, a storm made flesh, and he was focused entirely on her. He stopped a mere foot away, looming over her. The sheer heat rolling off his body was a tangible thing, chasing away the cold that had settled deep in her bones. He smelled of pine and winter, and something else, a dark, intoxicating musk of pure power that made her head swim. He lifted a hand, his movements slow, deliberate, as if not to startle her. His fingers, long and calloused, brushed a strand of matted hair from her cheek. The touch was a brand, a searing, electric shock that lit up every nerve ending in her body. A whimper escaped her lips, a sound of pure, overwhelmed sensation. Mine, the Alpha King growled, the word a low, guttural vibration that seemed to shake the very ground she stood on. It wasn't a claim. It was a statement of fact, a truth the universe had just revealed to him. He looked past her, his molten gaze pinning Marcus to the spot. The contempt and raw, unrestrained fury in that look was terrifying to behold. "You brought her to me," he said, his voice dropping to a shindly soft whisper. "You brought my mate to my border, starving and dressed in rags, to sell her to me like cattle." Mate. The word shattered the world. It echoed in the ringing silence, a pronouncement of doom and salvation all at once. Elara's knees gave out. She would have collapsed onto the cold ground, but an arm like a band of steel shot out and wrapped around her waist, hauling her against a chest as hard as granite. She was pressed against him, her cheek against the rough fabric of his tunic. His scent enveloped her, overwhelming her senses. His heart hammered against her ear, a frantic, powerful rhythm that mirrored her own. He held her as if she were made of spun glass, yet with a possessiveness that left no room for escape. "The treaty is void," Kael declared, his voice booming with absolute authority, carrying to the stunned members of the Silverwood pack. He turned, his arm still locked around Elara, and began walking back toward his own territory. "She is not a tribute. She is my queen. And you," he snarled over his shoulder at the frozen, ashen-faced Marcus, "will pray that I am merciful enough to let you crawl away from my border with your life." He did not wait for an answer. With Elara held securely against his side, he crossed back into the shadows of Blackmir, his wolves closing in around them like a living shield. She looked back once, her head spinning. She saw Marcus, a statue of disbelief and horror, and behind him, the faces of her pack, finally looking at her. Not with pity, but with a dawning, terrified awe. They hadn't sold a worthless Omega. They had sold a queen. The journey to the heart of the Blackmir kingdom was a blur of motion and overwhelming sensation. Kael never let her go. He lifted her onto the back of his own warhorse, a monstrous black stallion with eyes of fire, and settled behind her, his body a solid wall of heat and strength. His arm remained locked around her waist, a constant, possessive pressure that was both terrifying and, to her shame, strangely reassuring. The cold had vanished, replaced by a searing warmth that seemed to sink right into her soul. They rode through a forest of colossal ancient trees that blotted out the sky, their branches like skeletal fingers laced together overhead. The air grew cooler, cleaner. The oppressive silence of the border gave Watsahoma the sounds of a living, breathing wilderness. They passed through a massive gate of black iron, wrought in the shape of snarling wolves, and into a courtyard carved from the mountain itself. Shadowmere Keep was not a castle. It was a fortress. A jagged black fang of rock and stone that clawed its way toward the heavens, its towers scraping the clouds. Windows glowed with warm golden light, like the eyes of the beasts that guarded it. It was intimidating, brutalist, and yet held a stark, undeniable beauty. It was a reflection of the king who ruled it. Wolves and shifters in dark leather and fur stopped and stared as their king rode in, not with a prisoner of war, but with a slip of a girl held in his arms as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. Whispers followed them like the rustling of leaves, a wave of shock and confusion that rippled through the fortress. Kael ignored them all. He dismounted with fluid grace and lifted her down as if she weighed nothing. Her feet touched the stone pavers, but her legs were still trembling too much to hold her. He simply adjusted his grip, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her into the keep. The great hall was a cavern of stone and timber, dominated by a hearth large enough to roast an ox. A massive throne carved from a single piece of obsidian and draped in black furs sat upon a raised dais. The air inside was warm and smelled of wood smoke, roasted meat, and beeswax. It was the scent of a home, albeit a formidable one. He carried her past curious onlookers, up a winding stone staircase, and down a long hall lined with imposing portraits of his ancestors. Each of them had the same dark hair, the same powerful build, the same air of absolute command, and in their eyes a glint of silver or gold that marked them as royalty of the Blackmir line. Finally, he pushed open a heavy oak door and stepped inside. He did not put her down. He walked across the plush carpets to a large bed piled high with furs and gently, so gently, laid her down upon it. The softness was a shock after a lifetime of straw pallets. The room was fit for a queen. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with rich tapestries. A plush chaise lounge sat near a set of tall, arched windows that looked out over a dizzying drop, the mountain falling away to a valley shrouded in mist. Kael stood over her, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. The molten gold of his eyes had softened slightly, but the intensity was still there, a burning focus that made her skin prickle. "You are safe here," he said, his voice a low rumble. Safe? How could she be safe with a man who looked at her as if he wanted to consume her? A man whose power was a living thing in the room, pressing in on her from all sides. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice thin and reedy, his brow furrowed. The question seemed to genuinely confuse him. "Want," he repeated. "I want to heal you. I want to feed you. I want to hear your name from your own lips, not from the mouth of the coward who sold you. I want to tear down the world that hurt you and build you a new one from the ashes." The raw, unvarnished sincerity of his words struck her dumb. He knelt beside the bed, bringing his face level with hers. The feral glow in his eyes was banked, replaced by something that looked unnervingly like pain. "My wolf," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "has been howling your name since I was a boy. I thought it was a madness, a curse of my bloodline, a ghost I was chasing. I never knew it was a promise." He reached out, his hand hovering over her cheek before he seemed to think better of it and drew it back. "To see you there, so frail, so hurt. It is a wound in my own soul." Before Elara could process this, the door opened and an old woman entered. She was stooped with age, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She carried a wooden tray laden with bowls and cloths. The healer. "Lyra," Kael said, his voice tight. "See to her." He stood and backed away, pacing the length of the room like a caged panther. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. He was radiating a desperate, violent energy that he was clearly struggling to contain. He was afraid of his own strength, afraid of frightening her. The old woman, Lyra, approached the bed with a calm smile. "Do not mind him, little one. The Alpha King is not used to feeling anything but rage and duty. You have rather broken him." Her voice was like dry leaves skittering across stone, but kind. Lyra set the tray down and began to gently clean the grime from Elara's face with a warm, damp cloth. The water was infused with herbs that smelled of lavender and chamomile, and the gentle touch was so foreign, so deeply needed, that tears pricked at the corners of Elara's eyes. "What is happening?" Elara whispered, looking from the healer to the pacing king. "The fated bond," Lyra said simply, as she examined a scrape on Elara's arm. "A thing of legends now, so rare. An unbreakable, predestined connection. His soul recognized yours, even if you did not. It is a gift, and right now a torment for you both." She gestured to Kael. "The incomplete bond is agony for an alpha of his power. He feels your hunger, your fear, your pain, as if it were his own. It is driving his wolf mad with the need to protect you, to claim you, to make you whole and safe." Elara looked at the formidable king, who had stopped his pacing to stare out the window into the darkness. His shoulders slumped, as if under an immense weight. He was feeling her weakness, her terror. The thought was both terrifying and strangely intimate. "But I am no one," Elara insisted, the old, familiar litany rising in her throat. "An omega, worthless." Lyra paused, her sharp eyes studying Elara's face intently. She gently took Elara's hand, her thumb tracing the delicate blue veins at her wrist. A thoughtful frown creased her brow. "No, child, not worthless," she murmured, almost to herself. "Hidden, there is power in your blood, something old and bright and sleeping. The kind of power someone might seek to bind, to suppress. Perhaps your alpha did not know what he had, only that it was something to be feared or controlled." Lyra's eyes flickered with a sudden, profound understanding. And then he sold it. He sold the sun, thinking it was a common candle. Food was brought. A simple, nourishing broth that Elara devoured, the warmth spreading through her limbs and chasing away the last of the deep-seated chill. Kael watched her from across the room, his golden eyes tracking every spoonful, a look of fierce satisfaction on his face as color returned to her cheeks. After she had eaten, and Lyra had tended to her minor cuts and bruises, the old healer finally left them alone. An awkward, heavy silence descended. Elara was no longer starving, but she was exhausted, her mind reeling. Mate, queen, hidden power. It was too much. "You should rest," Kael said, his voice softer now. He gestured to the vast, comfortable bed. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her voice small. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "My place is with you, but I will not crowd you. Not yet." He pointed to the chaise lounge by the fire. "I will be there. No one will enter this room. No one will harm you. I swear it on my life." She watched as the most feared alpha in the known lands settled himself onto the lounge, making his massive frame seem impossibly contained in the small space. He did not take his eyes off her until her own heavy eyelids fluttered and closed, pulling her down into a darkness that, for the first time in her life, did not feel empty. It felt watched over. The days that followed were a strange dream of luxury and confusion. Elara was given clothes made of silk and velvet, fabrics she had only ever seen on the Alpha's family. She was served meals that could have fed her entire old pack for a week, but she was not allowed to leave the suite of rooms Kael had given her. It was a gilded cage, and he was her ever-present warden. The bond between them was a constant, thrumming presence, a living cable of energy that connected their souls. When she felt a pang of fear, he would appear at her door, his eyes wild with concern. When a wave of profound loneliness washed over her, she would feel a phantom warmth, a sense of his presence, even if he was rooms away. It was invasive and unnerving. Worse was feeling him. His emotions were a raging ocean compared to her quiet stream. She felt the crushing weight of his responsibilities as king, a burden that never ceased. She felt the constant simmering rage his wolf held toward the world for having harmed her. And underneath it all, a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own, but magnified 1,000 times over. It was this feeling, more than anything, that chipped away at her fear. How could she be terrified of a man who felt as broken as she did? One afternoon, he was summoned to his council. He had hesitated to leave, his jaw tight with reluctance. "I will not be long," he had promised, his golden eyes intense. "Rorik will be outside the door. You have only to call." Rorik was his beta, a mountain of a man with a quiet demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. She knew she was safe, physically. But as soon as Kael was gone, a profound coldness seeped into the room. The bond, stretched by distance, became a source of dull, aching pain in her chest, a constant, nagging emptiness. It was the feeling of a limb that had been severed. She paced the room, her anxiety mounting, feeling the echo of his own frustration from wherever he was in the keep. Kael stormed back into the room 2 hours later, a thundercloud of fury. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Elara jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The council," he snarled, stalking toward the fireplace and bracing his hands on the mantel, his back to her. His knuckles were white. "Lord Vanthorn and his ilk. They see you as a weakness, a stray omega from a bankrupt pack that has bewitched their king. They question my judgment. They question you." The sheer venom in his voice when he spoke of them was shocking. "They demand I set you aside and make a political match with the Stonecrest pack to fortify our southern border." Elara's blood ran cold. Set her aside. Of course. It was logical. It was what a king should do. She was nothing, a liability. The old, familiar feelings of worthlessness washed over her. "Maybe they are right," she whispered, hugging herself. "A king needs a strong queen. A political alliance, it makes sense." He whirled around, his eyes blazing with a hurt and furious fire that stunned her. "Do you think this is about politics?" he roared, crossing the room in 2 strides to stand before her. He gripped her upper arms, his hold firm but not painful. "Do you think you are some pawn I can just set aside? You are the other half of my soul. Without you, my kingdom will crumble to dust, because its king will be a hollow, feral beast. Without you, I am nothing." The raw vulnerability in his voice, in his blazing golden eyes, shattered her defenses. This was not a king. This was a man laid bare, his heart exposed and bleeding. He was shaking, his massive frame trembling with the force of his emotion. "Kael," she breathed, her own fear forgotten. She raised a hesitant hand and laid it on his chest, right over his wildly beating heart. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure energy arced between them, and she felt a wave of his anguish, his terror of losing her, wash through the bond. He flinched as if burned, but did not pull away. He closed his eyes, a pained groan escaping his lips. "Your touch," he rasped. "It is the only thing that quiets the storm." He slowly, carefully, wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "Forgive me," he murmured against her scalp. "My rage, It is not for you. It is for them, for anyone who would dare to diminish you. I have spent my entire life in control, Elara, a fortress of duty and ice. And you have shattered it all without even trying. She relaxed in his hold, her cheek pressed against his chest. She could feel the frantic rhythm of his heart begin to slow, to match the steady beat of her own. The ache in her chest from the stretched bond eased, replaced by a profound, humming warmth. In his arms, the gilded cage felt like a sanctuary. For the first time, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt found. It was on the third day that everything changed again. A scout, breathless and wide-eyed, had burst into the hall where Kael was overseeing the morning meal, Elara seated tentatively beside him in a chair that was clearly meant for a queen. "Your Majesty," the scout panted, bowing low, "there is a party at the eastern border. It is Alpha Marcus of the Silverwood pack. He demands an audience. He is begging to see the girl." A deathly silence fell over the hall. Every head turned to look at Elara. Kael went perfectly still, a predator scenting a threat. A low, dangerous growl started deep in his chest. Begging. The word was so incongruous, so impossible that Elara couldn't process it. Marcus did not beg. He commanded. He took. He destroyed. "He claims there has been a terrible misunderstanding," the scout continued, his voice trembling, "that she was not a tribute to be sold, but a cherished ward entrusted to your care for protection. He wishes to escort her home." Kael let out a sound that was half laugh, half snarl. "He is a liar and a coward," he growled, his golden eyes flashing. He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "And he is a fool to come back to my lands." "What does he want?" Elara asked, her hands clenched in the velvet of her dress. "Why now? Why come back for her after casting her out?" Kael's gaze softened as it fell on her. He saw the confusion and fear warring in her eyes. "He has realized his mistake," Kael said, his voice grim. "He has learned what you are. Or at least, he has learned your value to me." He held out a hand to her. "This is not my decision to make. It is yours. Will you come with me to the border? Will you face him?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to hide in this fortress forever. But the woman who had trembled and starved at that border 3 days ago was not the same woman sitting here now. She was still afraid, but a new, unfamiliar strength was taking root in her soul, nurtured by the bond and the unwavering belief in Kael's eyes. She would not be a pawn in anyone's game any longer. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. A silent promise. Together. The ride to the border was starkly different from her first journey into this land. This time she rode her own horse, a gentle gray mare, with Kael at her side. A contingent of 20 of his best warriors rode behind them, a silent, deadly escort. As they neared the border, she could feel the change in the air. A palpable desperation rolled off the Silverwood pack. They were not arranged in a militaristic formation. They were crowded near the stone line, a pathetic, huddled mass. And at their head stood Marcus. The sight of him stole her breath. He was haggard, his face pale and drawn. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. When he saw her, dressed in fine clothes, her hair clean and shining, riding beside the formidable Alpha King, a look of utter despair crossed his face. He fell to his knees. The Alpha of the Silverwood pack, the man who had tormented her for years, knelt in the mud before her. "Elara!" he cried out, his voice cracking. "Thank the spirits you are safe." Kael dismounted, his face a mask of stone, and helped her down. They walked to the edge of the border, stopping a dozen feet from the kneeling Alpha. "You have a stunning amount of nerve, Marcus," Kael said, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus ignored him, his eyes fixed on Elara, pleading. "It was a trick, Elara, a ruse. I knew of a plot against you, a threat within our own lands. I could not protect you there. I had to get you to safety, to the one place no one would dare follow. I entrusted you to the care of the Alpha King. It was the only way. Now the threat is gone. You can come home." The lies were so blatant, so pathetic, that Elara felt not anger, but a profound and weary pity. Home? To the people who had stared at her with contempt as they sent her to her presumed death? To the man who had starved her into submission? "You're lying," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. "You sold me. You threw me away because you thought I was worthless." "No!" He scrambled forward, trying to crawl across the border. But Kael's warriors moved as one, their hands on their swords, stopping him cold. "Never, Elara, you are precious to us. To me. Our pack needs you. Our lands are dying. The seer. She told me after you left. She told me what your bloodline means. You are a luminary, a child of the sun. Your light can heal the blight. You can save us." So there it was. The truth. Not concern for her, but greed for her power. The power Lyra had sensed. He hadn't known what he had until it was gone, and now he was back, begging for his prize. She looked past him, at the faces of her old pack. She saw their hunger, their desperation, and in their eyes she saw the same greedy hope that was in Marcus's. They didn't want her. They wanted a tool, a magical cure for their self-inflicted wounds. She looked back at Kael, at his strong, stoic face. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, letting her make the choice. He would accept whatever she decided, even if it tore him apart. And in that moment, she knew. She knew where she belonged. "My home is not with you," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound finality. She took a step back, closer to Kael's side. "You did not entrust me to his care. You sold me to your enemy. And he," she said, her voice softening as she glanced up at Kael, "showed me more kindness in a single hour than you showed me in a lifetime. I am not your savior. I am not your tool, and I will not be returning with you." A collective moan of despair rose from the Silverwood pack. Marcus's face crumpled, the last vestiges of hope dying in his eyes. His desperate gamble had failed, and then the desperation curdled into something ugly, something vicious. "Then you will be no one's!" he shrieked, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. He lunged to his feet. "If I cannot have you, he will not either. Take her!" It was an act of suicidal madness. His dozen guards, gaunt and weary, drew their rusty blades and charged across the border. It was a pathetic, desperate assault, but it was aimed at her. Kael moved like a bolt of lightning. He was a blur of black, intercepting the first two guards before they were halfway to her. There was the sickening crunch of bone and the wet sound of a blade finding its home. He didn't just fight. He became a whirlwind of death, his movements economical and brutally efficient. But there were too many. They were trying to flank him, to get to her. Rorik and the Blackmir warriors engaged, and the border erupted into a chaotic symphony of screaming men and clashing steel. Marcus himself, his eyes wild with insanity, broke through the line, a dagger clutched in his hand. He was not aiming for Kael. He was aiming for her. Kael saw it. He roared her name, a sound of pure terror, and threw himself in front of her. He was turning, trying to bring his own sword around, but he was off balance. Marcus's desperate lunge was clumsy, but it was fast. The dagger, a wicked shard of obsidian, plunged deep into Kael's side, just below his ribs. A gasp tore from Kael's lips, not of pain, but of fury. He backhanded Marcus across the face, a blow that sent the smaller Alpha flying through the air to land in a crumpled heap, unconscious or dead. But the damage was done. Kael staggered, his hand flying to the wound. Dark blood, almost black, gushed between his fingers. He looked at her, his golden eyes wide with shock and a fierce, protective urgency. "Elara, get back!" But she couldn't move. A pain that was not her own exploded in her side, a phantom agony that mirrored his wound. The bond, a conduit of shared existence, flooded her with his torment. It was excruciating, a fire burning through her veins. She saw the edges of her vision begin to gray, the strength leaving her limbs as his own life force began to drain away. He was dying. Because of her. To protect her. No, the word was not a thought. It was a primal decree that erupted from the deepest, most hidden part of her soul. A denial of reality itself. No. Something deep within her shattered. A dam of ancient power, bound and suppressed for a lifetime, broke apart. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated light, a searing, blinding energy that had been coiled inside her like a sleeping star. And it was waking up. She reached out, her hands trembling, and pressed them against Kael's wound. Her fingers touched his blood-soaked tunic, and the world exploded. A wave of pure, incandescent white light erupted from her body. It was not hot, but it was more intense than the sun. It washed over the battlefield in a silent, luminous tide. The sound of fighting stopped. The screams died. Everyone, Blackmir and Silverwood alike, was frozen, blinded by the impossible radiance that was pouring from the small Omega girl. The light felt like life itself. Where it touched the wounded Blackmir warriors, their cuts knitted closed. Where it touched the ground, the dying grass seemed to perk up, turning a vibrant green. But where it touched the attacking Silverwood guards, it felt like fire. They screamed and recoiled, shielding their eyes, their skins smoking as if touched by a holy flame. The light did not harm the innocent. It scoured the corrupt. Kael gasped as the light poured into him through her hands. He looked down, his eyes wide with disbelief. Beneath her palms, the gaping wound was closing, the flesh knitted together, the torn muscle mending, the skin sealing over until not even a scar remained. The pain vanished from her own side, replaced by a surge of incredible, overwhelming power. It flowed from her, through her, a river of starlight and creation. She was a luminary, a living beacon. She felt Kael's strength flowing back into him, and through the bond, she felt his awe, his reverence, his love. It was a staggering, beautiful thing, and it anchored her, keeping her from being consumed by the sheer magnitude of the power she was wielding. His soul was a rock in the heart of her hurricane of light. The light finally receded, drawing back into her until it was just a soft, golden aura surrounding her skin. She swayed, dizzy from the expenditure, and Kael's arms, now impossibly strong again, caught her and held her tight. The clearing was silent. The remaining Silverwood guards were on their knees, weeping, their weapons discarded. Marcus lay unmoving on the ground. The fight was over. She had ended it not with violence, but with a truth that could not be denied. Kael held her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. His golden eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Elara," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion so profound it left him breathless. He looked from her radiant face to the defeated cowards of her former pack, and then back to her. A slow, wondering smile spread across his face. He knelt before her. The Alpha King of the Blackmir, the most powerful wolf in the north, knelt in the dirt at her feet. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. "You knelt before me as a sacrifice," he said, his voice a raw, reverent whisper that held the weight of 1,000 vows. "But it is I who have been brought to my knees." The remaining Silverwood wolves were stripped of their weapons and sent stumbling back into their blighted lands, leaderless and broken. Marcus was not dead, merely unconscious. Kael's judgment was swift and absolute. He was exiled, banished to the barren northern wastes, to live out his days alone with the consequences of his greed. He would never lead a pack again. The journey back to Shadowmere was a triumph. The Blackmir warriors looked at Elara with a new, profound respect. They had seen her power, seen her heal their king, and end a battle without throwing a single punch. They had seen their king kneel to her. She was not just his mate. She was their salvation. Back in the Queen's chambers, the fire crackled, casting a warm, intimate glow. The adrenaline had faded, leaving Elara feeling drained, but strangely peaceful. The power that had erupted from her now lay quiet, a warm and steady presence beneath her skin, no longer sleeping, but waiting. Kael stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit valley. He had been quiet since they returned, a thoughtful, almost solemn energy radiating from him. He turned to face her, his golden eyes soft in the firelight. "I have a kingdom at my feet," he said, his voice low and serious. "Tonight, I lay it at yours." He crossed the room and stopped before her. He did not touch her, but the air between them vibrated with a powerful, unspoken need. The bond was a living thing, a taut wire of desire and deep abiding love that pulled them inexorably together. The time for fear was over. The time for waiting was over. "The bond is incomplete," he said, his voice rough. "It needs to be sealed, claimed. It is a physical act, Elara, a bite. It will merge our souls, our strengths, our very lives. There will be no more secrets, no more distance between us. I will be yours, and you will be mine, in every way that matters." His gaze was intense, questioning. "I will not force you. I will wait 1,000 years, as if I must. But my soul cries out for it. For you." She looked into his eyes, into the golden depths that held a universe of devotion, and saw her future. She saw a life not of servitude or fear, but of partnership, of love, of light and shadow balanced in perfect harmony. She was not afraid. "I am not afraid of you, Kael," she whispered. And it was the truest thing she had ever said. She reached up and cupped his jaw, her thumb stroking the rough stubble there. "I am yours, and you are mine." A shudder of pure relief went through his massive frame. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "My queen," he breathed. With infinite tenderness, he tilted her head to the side, exposing the delicate skin of her neck and shoulder. He hesitated for a single heartbeat, his eyes asking one final silent question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He lowered his head, and she felt the ghost of a touch as his lips brushed against her skin. Then, a sharp, brief sting as his teeth sank into the junction where her neck met her shoulder. It was not a violent act, but a sacred one. A brand of ownership and belonging. A surge of pure, primal energy ripped through her, a blinding flash of golden light behind her eyes. She felt him, all of him. His memories, his fears, his boundless love for her. She felt his lonely childhood, his brutal training, the crushing weight of his crown. And she felt the moment his soul had first recognized hers across that border. A cataclysmic explosion of hope in a lifetime of darkness. In turn, she felt him receiving her own life, her own pain, her own quiet loneliness, and embracing it, soothing it, claiming it as his own. When he pulled back, the two small puncture marks on her skin glowed with a faint golden light, before fading into a permanent, silvery mark. The bond was complete. The dull ache she had lived with for days was gone, replaced by a profound sense of wholeness, of peace. She could feel his soul entwined with hers, a constant, comforting presence. They were one. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, laying her down on the furs as he had that first night. But this time he followed, stretching out beside her, pulling her into the solid warmth of his embrace. This time, there was no distance between them. There never would be again. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, the words a sacred vow. "I love you," she whispered back, her voice sure and strong, and she finally, truly, felt like she was home. 6 months later, Elara stood on the balcony of her chambers, Kael's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. The valley below was no longer shrouded in mist. Under her gentle, unconscious influence, the perpetual gloom of the Blackmir lands had begun to lift. Patches of sunlight now dappled the forest floor, and the crops in the lower fields were thriving. Her light had not just saved her king, it was healing his kingdom. She was no longer the frail, frightened girl who had been sold at the border. She was a queen, confident and beloved. Her power was a part of her, a tool she was learning to wield with grace and wisdom, with Lyra as her guide and Kael as her anchor. News had trickled in from the Silverwood lands. They were broken. Their lands had fully soured, and their people were starving. Their desperate plea to other packs for aid refused. Their alpha's betrayal had become a cautionary tale whispered in every territory. They had thrown away the sun, and now they lived in perpetual twilight. She felt a pang of pity for the people, but none for the Alpha who had caused their ruin. Kael pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand resting protectively over her gently swelling belly. Twins. The bond had been fruitful, a boy and a girl, one to carry the shadow, the other the light, a new balance for a new era. "The council is worried you are giving away too much of your energy to the land," he rumbled, his voice laced with amusement. Elara smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them my queen's light is infinite," he said softly, "and that they were lucky to stand in its warmth. I told them that for the first time in centuries, this kingdom is not just strong, it is whole." She turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to cup his face. The molten gold in his eyes was a steady, loving flame, reserved only for her. He was still a formidable, fearsome king to the rest of the world, but with her he was just Kael. Her Kael. "We are whole," she corrected gently. together. He smiled, a true radiant smile that transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly handsome. He leaned in and captured her lips in a kiss that was full of love and promise, a kiss that sealed the truth of their new reality. They were not just a king and his fated mate. They were the beginning of a new legend. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.